Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrosson, and today I'm thrilled to have Daniel Kivatinos, the founder and CEO of JustPaid, also founder of DrChrono, a top 1% YC exit. So excited to talk about you, Daniel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for having me on. I'm excited to be on the show. And actually, you're one of the investors I'm excited. Honestly, I think you have a great reputation in Silicon Valley. So super excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for that. I couldn't, I'll give you the money later for saying that. Thank you. That's awesome. Couldn't have said it better. So let's dive in. Super exciting. You've built a startup, top 1% YC exit. I want to talk about that. Now you're building something else. Before we dive into all of that, maybe introduce yourself, just who you are, and then we'll dive into what you're building.
Sure. So I'm Daniel Kivatinos. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time now, and I've built my first company, DrChrono, which you mentioned, and it was a huge success. With that exit, I felt like I always had more to do, and I always feel like there's a fire, at least inside of me, to keep building. So I wanted to jump back into the race and kind of looked at a lot of different areas and jumped back into the I'd say I like the complex areas. So, FinTech is an area I feel like there's a lot of change that can happen and really good change. And I'm excited about like what the possibilities are. So jumped back into that area. Felt like there's a lot of disruption that can happen. And, working on now my new company, which is JustPaid.io.
And so I want to go back to DrChrono and the exit, but I also want to jump on what you just said and double click on that. I feel in the Valley, we also probably want to talk about what's happening in the Valley right now later in the episode, but in the Valley right now, I think there used to be a huge trend on FinTech. It was the rage, the 2020s, Andreessen famously said every company is going to become a FinTech company. And now I think it's a little bit out of fashion. People are just focusing on AI. I've actually heard a lot of people say, well, FinTech is finished. FinTech is behind us, which I personally don't think is true. I've invested a lot in FinTech over the years, but it is true that it's less trending right now. How do you think about that? Is it a negative point for you to be able to raise and to sell what you're building? Or do you think actually FinTech has great days ahead of it?
I think, it's very similar to when I started my first company. So when I started DrChrono, healthcare was not a hot industry at all. So health tech, building software for physicians and medical professionals. The investor community really was I would say, honestly, very cautious of that industry. And I feel like I run towards an industry when others are running at least hesitant to move towards it. When it comes to the FinTech world and what's happening there, I think that there's a lot of disruption and change that can happen. I think a lot of it has to do with the interfaces that are there and the experiences that people are having. A lot of them are honestly good, but not amazing. And what I mean by that is love or hate companies like Robinhood, but it is possible to disrupt the incumbents in a lot of ways where if you build something even incrementally better than what is existing today, you have a wedge in to honestly change a whole industry. And I think when it comes to numbers specifically, there are a lot of people that are not sophisticated in the world of numbers. And what I mean by that is when you had, 2020 happen, you have these really smart people in these really smart industries like Silicon Valley Bank, and other FinTech companies doing all of this really great stuff. All of the layoffs that are happening, a lot of this does come down to the numbers and understanding and modeling what the reality is of if we go bullish, if we don't go bullish, if we put all our money in bonds, all of this, there's so many different ways to think about things. I think, sadly, a lot of the interfaces didn't help the human beings running the world, and people were putting their chips in different areas, and the interfaces were just not helping them make those decisions. So what's insane is a lot of what happens today is run in Excel. Right? Microsoft is obviously doing an amazing job. They have these beautiful templates and Excel sheets, and a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of PE firms and a lot of bankers live and die by Excel sheets. And the world runs in Excel. And can we do better than what's out there? And this goes and permeates beyond that, where it's even money movement itself. I think crypto is trying to tackle pieces of this where it's trying to, decentralize like a lot of what's happening. But, as this change is happening, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of who and who's going to make these changes. Now, is fintech like a good industry to go into? The answer is yes. Everybody is transacting some form of money to purchase something or to get paid for something. So to say it's like a bad industry to go into is kind of crazy when we all use it day in and day out. I just think that we just kind of have to take a step back and say, what is not done and what haven't we done to make our lives easier, to not have to use computers as much, to like live and die by that. So the answer is like, I kind of go into the industries when like people may not think that they're so interesting. But, in my head, I'm like, the world runs on money.
Yeah.
Everybody is using money. Startups are building their companies with money. Like, everybody is, mortgages and all of these things are all about money. And it's like, how do you even operate when you don't have a full picture? And a lot of people kind of make, assumptions in their head and through modeling and whatnot. So digging in deeper and saying like, what could we do to make businesses run more effectively? I mean, this is the way I was thinking about it. How can you make a business run more effectively when they were doing mass layoffs, right? Like, what can we do to help people understand like parts of their business that they just are not understanding? So the answer is yes. I think it's a really amazing industry. I think it's a really good industry, but I also don't have my, I know it's going to take time to build like a meaningful company. And in my head, it takes time. And, people want like a fast, like, 3-year, multi-billion-dollar company. It may take longer. At least my mind is in that mindset where it's like, build it and build it for as long as, work on it for as long as it takes to get it to that point. But, there are some industries where people hit like walls. And I feel like when you are looking at the monetary market, fintech or finance, if you pick the right market, your limitations are less so than other markets. And, I was talking to an entrepreneur yesterday for 2 hours, and they built an amazing company. They have good revenue, but they've hit a cap. They've hit a wall because of the market that they picked. They kind of cornered themselves. So now they're building something completely separate to try to break free of like that cap that is on their company. I think that's okay to think that way. I think it's okay to hit caps, and you can always like build and build and build on top of that and like get a bigger market over time. I do think it's silly to just think about a market overall to like say, I'm going to go after a market because the market size is huge. I mean, for me, I think about money because it just touches everyone's lives. So the answer is yes. I think it's a market that's still super interesting. I just think because interest rates are high now, a lot of people think it's not the best industry right now. And all of the debacles that have happened also that, over the last several years that made everybody look bad at the finance industry,
Well, that's interesting. What I'm hearing from what you're saying as well is probably, I'm guessing, because you've had that prior experience and that took time, you're able to have such a higher view on everything. You have time. You don't want to have an exit in 2 years, and because it takes time, and everybody's such in a rush. Oh, I want the exit in 12 minutes. Give me my money back plus 25% or whatever. And you've been through that. You've been through building and exiting, and it takes time. And you also have that perspective of saying, well, right now, maybe fintech is not in the best favors of everyone because of interest rates and SVB and whatever. But over time, in our lifetime, in what we do, fintech money does touch every single aspect of our life. So I really appreciate, and I'm sure our conversation here is going to be much, much more interesting because of all that perspective that you have, because you've been through it. So maybe it's a great time to jump a little bit into the sort of the backstory. I believe you went through YC with the first business in 2011. And so just so we know in terms of timing and the time that it takes, when did you exit and kind of what was the journey up to this point? Obviously, it's going to be summed up in a couple of minutes. It's years and years and years of your life. But what was the journey like up until the exit?
Yeah. So I met my co-founder actually for that company. We went to college together and, we took a lot of classes together, and I felt like we had a really good banter back and forth in terms of the technical side. So in college, we would be given a project. We'd take the project and basically work on it together for a few weeks. And I always felt like that dynamic was what I wanted if I ever started a company. And, everybody in their life goes through these moments where they're like, that person is really smart. I wish I could have worked with them, or maybe in the future I'll work with them. I think for me, I actually asked, right? I said, hey, do you want to work together? Let's try to figure something out. And 2008 happened. I was working at like a failing startup and moved on from that failing startup, thinking about, what do I want to work on next? And this 2008, people were losing their homes, and it was a scary time for everyone. I felt like for me, I learned a lesson. I learned a lesson that said, like, try to work on things that you're passionate about and that you want to work on, because if you don't, then other people will just give you projects, and like your lifeblood will be, utilized in like something that you may not really want to work on. So for me, I was thinking about the healthcare space. I had family members that were not doing so well, and I saw everything being like literally just on paper. Like, I'd go to the doctor's office and you'd see all of these like paper folders all over the walls in 2008, right? And there were computers back then. And, I felt like we could maybe do something. And I started talking to my co-founder. So we started brainstorming about like, okay, maybe we could do something in this space. We kind of decided to build a reminder system to remind patients about their appointments. And that was really like the inception of like the company, hence the word DrChrono. So it's like a time reminder. And we started building the company, and we were rapidly iterating. So we were building in the cloud, which was rare. A lot of people were just building like floppy, CD like type products that you would install in like a Microsoft server. And, we were thinking very, very, very far ahead, where we said, we're going to build something modern in the cloud, and it's going to be, you can access it wherever you're at. So if you have like a mobile clinic, you could access it. If you're on vacation, you can access it. If you're a patient and you're traveling, you can access it to see multiple doctors. Through that process with my co-founder, we took a lot of feedback from physicians and rapidly iterated on like, what do they want next? What do they want next? And that iteration cycle became like the ethos of our first company, which was talk to someone, get feedback, build it, present it, see if they'll use it. And we just kept doing this for honestly about 2 years, from 2008, 2009, 2010. Then 2010, we kind of understand that the iPad is going to be coming out. And we basically sat down and said, let's build before this iPad is actually released. We built the very first medical record on the iPad. So we were building in the cloud, basically like scheduling software in the cloud. And then we wanted to create a medical record that was like a mobile medical record on an iPad before the iPad was released. And we were able to get access. Apple does this where they'll give access to developers before they give access to like actual customers. So if Apple announces another product like Vision OS or whatever it is, they actually give access to the developer community first, which we got access. And we built the first iPad app. And it was April 2010, launched the very first medical record the world ever saw on an iPad.
Incredible.
And, it sounds so silly. Right time, right place, right idea, right team to execute. Launched it. And, from there, I think we were off to the races, where we had something that was acceptable to the venture community because it looked like super modern and slick, and it was mobile, and no one was doing it at the time. And that's where I think we had the interest of Y Combinator. And really what happened was I emailed Y Combinator at that time and said, hey, we have users, we have paying users. We were actually featured on Apple on their website because we were the only medical record, right? We were being featured on their website. So Y Combinator said, sure, we could talk to you. We had Alexis Ohamian come out to our offices. So it was the founder of Reddit, came out to our offices way back when. We showed him like what we were working on. We were working on it in New York City at the time. And, he saw the product, and he saw me and my co-founder, and he's like, you guys aren't funded, and you have all of this happening for your company. Why don't you fly out to California and pitch your idea to, the whole partnership of YC? So we said yes. I mean, I didn't really, back then YC was kind of like it was big, but not really big. It was like a strange, like eclectic group of like, I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't what it is today, where everybody knows what Y Combinator is. It was just a strange group of people that like to do this weird thing, start their own companies. And it was just strange. And, not everybody knew the name Y Combinator. But we flew out, We sat in front of the founders, Jessica Livingston and Paul Graham and Alexis Ohamian and Paul Buchheit and the other founders, and just basically said, this is what we're working on. And for me, I was going to work on it regardless of if Y Combinator invested or not. So they saw something in me and my co-founder that they might miss out on because we were building the first medical record ever for mobile. And, we said, this is what we're doing, and we're featured by Apple, and we have no investors, and we have all of these users. We were their very first healthcare investment. I remember Paul Graham saying, we can invest in healthcare. Like, he was talking to the other partners, like, we never invested in healthcare before. We could do this. They started to ask us a bunch of questions about like the details of like the company. We walked out of that meeting and I thought, honestly, we bombed it. Like, because they were grilling us so hard, I just thought I was like, all right, we're going to fly back to New York now and just keep working on the company. And I just remember thinking that was a dumb idea to come here because we didn't have that much money at the time. We really were hyper bootstrapped where, just to fly out here, it cost, I don't know, it was like a few $1,000s. And to rent a hotel room, it was like a few $1,000s. I just remember being really stressed over that, being like, we need that money to like build the company, not be like running around talking to investors. They told us they would call us that night to see if we got in or not. And I remember it was probably like 8 p.m. that night. And it was like a weekend, which was crazy. Paul Graham calls us up and he says, hey guys, you're in. Do you want in or not? And, it was basically, he's like, make a decision right now, yes or no. We said yes immediately. I think the reason why is just because, honestly, it was all the articles Paul Graham put online.
Yeah.
That was what really made my co-founder trust Paul Graham. It was all that like information he was putting online about startups. It made us like trust them a lot. And there were other investors who wanted to invest prior to them, but it was, I'd call it like Shark Tank deals where they wanted way more of the company. They wanted to put in strange, terms that we both felt like, why would we even work at our own company if we like accepted these terms? But Y Combinator like was reputable and the team seemed like they could genuinely help us. And we took a leap of faith and took their money. And then, the one requirement was that we had to stay in Silicon Valley in Mountain View for 3 months, which all of the investment money that we had would go towards literally just staying in Silicon Valley for 3 months. So that was like not, they didn't give us that much money back then, honestly.
Yeah.
But we said, let's do it. Let's take the money. We took the money and then flew out to California. I mean, there's way more to this story. I could keep going, but that's kind of like how we first got into Y Combinator.
It's insane.
The first time.
I love it. It's so interesting to learn about YC, what it was at the time. I mean, not learn for the first time, but every time I hear this thing, it was so small. It was such a very, very small group of people. Obviously, right now it's much bigger. It's gotten huge, and then back to a smaller cohort, etc. since last year, but still much bigger than it was at the time. And I do want to ask you, because as you might know, Lobster Capital, my fund, and me personally, I've decided to only invest in YC now. I just recognize so much value into what they do. And I'm able to have access to some of the best deals in YC because of my network there and everyone that I know. And so I do want to ask you, was it worth it? Because you said it was kind of a leap of faith and they were reputable, but you didn't know if you should do that or not. Looking back, obviously you went for a second time. So I'm guessing you're going to say yes. But if yes, why was it worth it? But just asking the question plainly, was it worth it in your opinion?
I mean, clearly, yes. I don't think our company would have been as successful without having their backing. And I think now I did Y Combinator a second time, but the value proposition then and now is slightly different. Back then, they didn't have a lot of the tools they have now. Back then, it was very driven by the founders. So like me and my co-founder probably had like 40 one-on-one sessions easy with Paul Graham. And we did a lot of sessions with Sam Altman. So like Sam Altman was our advisor, Gary Tan was our advisor, Paul Graham was our advisor, Jessica Livingston, and Paul Buchheit.
Incredible.
And it was completely driven by just the founders of YC trying to make us successful. And, the value there in that first time, I remember going on a walk with Paul Graham and saying, we need more capital. And Paul Graham kind of he rattled off one name. He's like, just reach out to this guy. And I'm like, he's not going to follow up with me. and say, did you do it? So like I immediately took down the name and I immediately like scrambled to reach that person. And, one phone call and the guy was like, yeah, I'll make an investment. And I think that was really powerful.
Wow.
Like, I mean, that's an example of like how they had helped. I'll give you another crazy story. So me and my co-founder were basically building the product, right? We were the two engineers building the product. And our very first engineer who we wanted to hire, we didn't know how to recruit. We were just two like founders, right? So we're like, okay, this guy clearly maybe he's thinking about working for us. I remember asking like Paul Graham again, saying, hey, Paul, can you call this engineer for us and like convince him? Paul Graham made the time, and spent probably 30 minutes on the call with like our engineer. I don't know if
Wow.
Paul Graham remembers this, but he was like recruiting for us. This is the secret sauce of YC where he was working his butt off to like make us successful. And I think in the early days, YC was different because it wasn't scalable, where the founders were doing everything, right? There wasn't the software that they have today. I mean, you're an investor, so you probably see all of the internal tools for investors.
I do. Yeah.
Demo day was very different. Demo day was all in person. So one of the values back then was, all of the founders would convince a bunch of wealthy people. Like I'd say it was probably 100, 200 wealthy people, wealthy venture capitalists to come sit in a room for the whole day and just see pitch after pitch after pitch in person. It was pretty grueling, I'm sure, on the investors. I think that they had to like sit there and like just listen that whole time, but that whole group convinced the investors to come. So YC convinced all of those investors to just be in that room, that these companies were worth it. That was part of the value also, like just them like really working that network. There were other values there, like they have Hacker News. So Hacker News is amazing. The whole entire like true hacker community in 2011 was all on Hacker News. And it captured the ethos of like what a hacker was back then, where like you would get someone who may or may not have an education and they just would religiously read what was happening on tech and Hacker News. There was nothing like Hacker News back then, nothing. There was very few like good sources of like information for hackers. So when we wanted to recruit talent, we would go through the YC community and we would get thousands of candidates that would just want to work with us. And I think most people didn't know who Y Combinator was, but we were recruiting the people who did, and they wanted to like be part of that. And it was a lot of missionaries in the early days. Like it wasn't mercenaries that want $700,000, and a great medical package and, all of these other things. I think they were just believers in like, I want to build something cool and I want to like work at a fun place and I want to learn as I go. And I think we got a lot of those really amazing people in the early days. And I think YC was able to create like a sphere around it where it was able to like become a recruiting engine and an advisement team. And that was like really the value for me in the early days. What's funny is now it's changed a lot, but yeah, we could talk about that.
Arguably, it's even better now because you have all those tools. You have work at a startup to really help you hire. You have Bookface to find investors. You have the startup school online. And is this why you came back? You said at the time, there's no tools. Now there are tools. They try to scale the original magic. Does it work? Does it actually scale, in your opinion?
The answer is yes. I mean, going through it again in winter 23 as a second time founder, what's great is I feel like I'm, as you're building your company, you kind of get disconnected from that community sometimes because you're working so hard, your head's down. So I kind of just, for my first company, went heads down and kind of disconnected. But for me, I wanted to get replugged into the community to really understand what's available. And, going through YC again was a very, like, for me, it was a decision that was an answer. Like, I already had the yes in my head. I want to do this again. And, probably the best way to think about this is if you're an investor and you're by yourself and term sheets don't exist and there, you have startups and you're the only investor, like when Sequoia, these, the older firms, they had to figure out like, what works, what doesn't work, like, 2 and 20. Okay, this is something that works, 2% management fee, 20% carry. Okay, that works. The nice thing about when you go into YC, it's like going to the gym or going to a community that you can like get feedback all of the time. And I feel like they've created this like feedback loop machine. And what I mean by that is every founder is trying to help every other founder. So not only are you getting the advisors for that 3-month period, you're also getting this intense community of builders that are very much aligned in what they're trying to do. They're all trying to make a change in the world. They're all trying to make their lives better. And they're all understanding, like, how do I do this through technology in some way? And, one founder will tell me one thing today, another founder will tell me another thing another day, another founder will tell me another thing another day. It compounds over time to minimize risk for the investor. So like it actually helps all the investors who are investing in Y Combinator companies, because as founders are helping each other viscerally, the investor can de-stress a little bit because they know the founder is getting a lot of good advice from other founders. Now, granted, a lot of the advice is like talk to your users. So, a lot of the advice is like, don't run out of cash. It is common sense stuff, but it's nice when the investor doesn't have to tell the founder that sometimes, right? So like you'll have a founder who's like building something and they're building it for themselves and they think everybody's going to want to use it. If they talk to other YC founders, they're going to get like a rude awakening where a Y Combinator founder may tell them like, hey, dude, no one's using your product and it's been, a long time. Or, hey, you're burning, whatever it is, some crazy amount of money per month and you only have so much in the bank. You need to do something drastic. Or, there's so many different areas that like I could talk about, but I think Y Combinator did something really unique in the sense that they've hyper-focused on founders helping founders. And they support that by having so many events and then so many alumni events. But they're also building a community, a recruitment machine. So they have this like software that helps you find the right people for your company. So that it's a recruiting engine. They're also building internal software that founders can log into to get advice or help. And between all of these different areas and angles, it becomes I view Y Combinator more as like a product offered to founders that will help advise the founders when needed. So now it's way different in the sense like I could log in at 2 a.m. and see like 5 founders like actively talking about the same problem that I might have. And then I could learn from those 5 founders.
It's interesting what you said. Having the community of founders talking to each other is actually reassuring for the investors. It makes the entrepreneurs better. And so what you're saying, without saying it, is we could argue that Lobster Capital's thesis of investing only in YC is one of the best theses ever for a fund. I'll take the win. And moving on to, I want to get to the exit, because obviously you're a top 1% YC exit. That's not nothing. Congratulations on that. And can you, again, kind of tell us the story of how it happened, kind of the behind the curtains, maybe some advice for founders trying to sell? Love to just get into exit a little bit.
Yeah, when you're building a business and you love it, you honestly want to work on it forever. And I think that's where like I personally felt about healthcare. And I feel like healthcare is one of those industries that like you can forever work on it and there's always something to do, whether it's like in biotech or on the tech side or just the pure medical side. I think the secret to building a successful company is honestly not just working on it for cash. Like you have to have that passion to work on something that you genuinely love and want to solve. If you don't do that, you're going to have a rude awakening, because a startup is not, you can have a good outcome, but there's also way more bad outcomes than good outcomes. Right. So like the reality of my company when I started it was, you see all of these horrible statistics online, like 90% of companies fail, 95% of companies fail, 97% of companies fail, 98%, 99% fail. And I'm reading all of this online through the life of my company. And I'm like, how do I not fail? And as you build a company, you do have to learn how to scale it. And you do have to always continually be learning. And you do have to like relinquish some of the work that you're doing. Like a great entrepreneur will be good at everything or a lot of their pieces. And the pieces that they're not good at, they'll have to hire people for. And the problem is an entrepreneur is like a great person to have, but also a horrible person if they don't like let other people help them. So I think one of the things me and my co-founder of that company were really good at were finding really brilliant people to help us work on this amazing company. And, it took a mind shift because you have to go, oh, this is something I was doing for like 3 years, 4 years. I'm just going to hand this to this person. And they may not do as good of a job as you, or they might do better. But handing it off as like part of the secret of like that scaling and learning new skills to help scale the company to the next level is honestly part of like the secret of our success was, okay, this brilliant person is now working on this piece. What can I work on now to help us scale to get more users or more revenue or create a better experience? And it was this iterative learning cycle, and they were very quick learning cycles. Okay, did this, solve this, do that. Okay, we got more revenues, new cycle, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And I think that those rapid iterative cycles made us very, very, very successful as co-founders. And I see a lot of this happening in because OpenAI is like, huge and hugely successful. I see a lot of the same methodology used there where they are experimenting, launching, refining, experimenting, launching, refining. And it's this cycle that's really healthy for a company to go through. And if you're able to continue that path, you will have a really innovative company as long as you're doing that. So, that was part of like my way of building the company. And, when you do that long enough, good things happen, right? People notice you and you have an exit. So, I mean, for me, that honestly was what brought us to that point from me. And it was a really great team. You kind of sometimes right place, right team, right possible partner. People have to align and all of that. And I feel like that was really honestly, I was fortunate to have such a great partnership with the acquirer. And I feel like they were right team to honestly like take the reins and like build the next version of what DrChrono is.
That's incredible. I mean, delegating is what you're referring to. It is always so difficult for entrepreneurs, and rightfully so, because it's your baby. Like you said, you're doing it for years, and one day you just have to stop, and just people don't want to do that. Do you have any advice on founders who are struggling to delegate? How do you actually, cross the chasm and be like, well, I'm going to have to let this go. And maybe, like you said, it's not done as well as I would have done, but I still need to let it go. I heard something that I apply to myself is if someone is able to do that 80% of what you would have done, it's good, you delegate it. So if it's 80% or better, just delegate it. But to people who are struggling to do that, what advice would you give them?
I think if you don't have product market fit, I think getting involved deeply in your company is critical, right? So like if you don't have product market fit, you probably shouldn't be hiring 10 salespeople. If you don't have product market fit, you probably shouldn't hire 10 engineers. If you don't have product market fit, you should have your hands in like a lot of different parts of the company to understand how to get product market fit. But the moment you have product market fit, and for me, what is product market fit? It's when you can get on a Zoom call or in-person meeting and your close rate is higher than 10%. Maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 20%. If you can actually get in a meeting with somebody and they go, oh, I can use your product. And then if they actually start using it and they're using your product, you have product market fit, right? At that point, as you get more and more users, what are you doing that you are bad at, or that you're doing and working on all night, or that someone else can do better than you? And I think asking yourself that question, or asking your co-founder, or, maybe you have an investor who's very candid with you, asking them, like, what should I do next? And an example is like, I think there was one project I was working on every single week, all of the time, every week. And I would stay up all night working on it, probably till like midnight. And, I think oddly, sometimes the right person comes around to take over that task. So like this one person applied for a job at our company, and, I got some feedback that, hey, they might be good for those like late night tasks that you work on. And my initial reaction was, oh no, they wouldn't do a good job like I'm doing. But my mind said, give them that job, but train them on exactly what you did, and then they can figure out how to do it better. So what we did is we hired the person, and hiring people, it's always stressful because your burn rate goes up and it may or may not be a good idea, but you can try, right? A lot of it was experimentation on like what's going to work well. So we hired this person in. I probably worked with them 4 or 5 months, and then they knew everything that was in my head, and they knew how I thought, and they knew how to do everything. And they said, I want to do it this way. And I didn't agree, but I said, let them sink or swim and let's see what happens.
Incredible.
And they worked with me till the end of the company, working with me. And I think that was where I kind of just said they have to take that on, and I have to let it go because there's other challenges inside of the company that I need to work on. And that was a big win because we found the right person for the job. If we hadn't have found the right person, I think maybe they would have done a good job, maybe not, I don't know. But part of their success was just the training and me saying how important this job was, and this was going to help us scale enormously, and it needed to be done right every other day. And they just took it serious, and they did it way better than I ever could have. And I felt like, okay, this is amazing. I don't have to work on it. And then I just literally never worked on it ever again. And it was just very relieving. But it took 5 months to get there, working with that person for hours. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Okay. Listen, we're already almost done with the time we have together. I do not want to go over and be respectful of your time. Do you want to briefly talk about Just Paid, what you're building, what you're doing? Because this is your new venture that you brought to YC. Maybe just, while we're here, explain to our listeners what it is that you're trying to build. And then we'll move with the ending questions that are very brief.
Sure. So Just Paid, why I worked on it was I realized a lot of companies have revenue challenges when building companies. And if you're a company that has 100 customers, 200 customers, 400 customers, at some point you have to hire a finance team to really help you generate that revenue and gather that revenue. What my co-founders and I really thought about were, what if software could do large swaths of what these finance teams do? And we wanted to work on revenue collections to collect revenue for companies as they scale. And, you think about some of these companies out there, they're just hiring people to do all of the work. So they're either hiring developers to analyze how the revenue is coming in. They're either hiring huge sales teams to look at contracts and say, okay, this contract is expiring, or this customer hasn't paid in this contract. So they have, a collections team. We're looking at it as a lot of these problems can be tackled through software. And, the big vision is it's basically an AI agent that helps collect the revenue for you. So if you're a salesperson, you sign a 2-year contract and it's for $48,000. Generally what happens is you just throw it over to finance right now. And finance is we'll figure out how to collect the revenue. What we're trying to do is let you throw it into our software and let it figure out how to collect your revenue. And there will be a driver. There's a finance team, but they're looking at the software instead of having to get on the phone themselves and say, hey, you owe us $2,000 this month. The software will figure out the most polite way to get the money and when the contract is ending and when the sales team should be reaching out again. So think of it as a way, it's a agent that helps the finance team, the sales team, and the startup to collect their revenue. Because generally right now, you'll hire expensive people, and, more expensive people just ups the burn rate, right? So that's the big grand vision of what we're first building out with Just Paid.
That's awesome. And going back to what we were talking about in the intro, this basically touches everyone. Every company in the world, has collect money that it's owed and has to have people working on that. And you're abstracting that job away with AI, which is a type of companies that YC is very excited about right now. How can we abstract in existing companies some of the work that's repetitive and not necessarily high value added? It is high value added because you're collecting the money. It's super important, but it's pretty repetitive. And how can we abstract that with AI? And that's what YC is very interested in right now, which is why I'm guessing it was a no-brainer for them to take you again in the batch plus with your past. What's a book or a quote, Daniel, that has had a huge influence on your life and that you keep in your mind very often?
Jim Collins wrote a bunch of books Jim Collins, you could just look him up. And he wrote like a series of 3 or 4 books on like building companies. And I think those books really helped me in the early days of my very first company, where, he had these interesting little tidbits of information that I really like kind of sat with me. And I'll just give you one, like from one of the books. He spoke about how if you were to purchase land, your company tends to last longer than companies that don't purchase land.
How come?
I thought about that for a while. I'm like, all right, Apple purchased their land, right? I think it sets a stake in the ground. I mean, this is just from his like research. It sets a stake in the ground that this company will be here for a long time. So the psychology of the company starts to change. I mean, if you go to Google's campus, I live down the block from Google. They literally bought all of this land, and it kind of sets the stage that we're not going to give up. I don't know. Have you ever been to Microsoft's campus?
Google I have, but Microsoft I don't. No, I haven't. Yeah.
I mean, I've been there. They bought all of this land. They have all of these buildings, and they have, huge teams of like divisions of people working on their products. And, it changes the psychology when you're walking around on the property that you own. And I think, one of the things that Y Combinator did right in the early days was they said, you are not going to work out of Y Combinator proper. You're going to come here once a week, twice a week, and then we're going to kick you out and you have to go find your own place to work and create your own culture. If they had all of those teams work together in a small, tight area, I think it would have been detrimental for founders. And what I mean by that is like the founders of Airbnb would have been working with the founders of another company, and, it might have distorted their culture and their view on the world. So like, all of this goes back to the Jim Collins book, where one of the books he's talking about, like, how do you create your culture? And what he's saying is like, if you purchase land, you tend to have a longer life duration as a company. That might not be so true today, but I think in my mind, it's still true to me. We're like, how do you say we're going to be here for a long time as a company? Mm-hmm. Then your team thinks long-term instead of, short-term. If you're like working in a co-working space and we work with like 30 other companies.
And Good to Great, I believe, is the most famous book from Jim Collins. And I think I read it like 10 years ago, but I see there's a bunch more. So I'm going to try to get up to speed. And so did you buy land with any of your companies yet, or is it still on the to-do list?
It's on the to-do list. I think, with my first company, part of the culture was making sure we had standalone buildings. So I always, my goal was to get a standalone building. I mean, as a startup, you only have so much cash. But I was very sensitive to, I want to build a culture. And this is before COVID, everybody was coming into the office. COVID changed everything for everybody. But I wanted to have like a standalone building that people felt like it was a home to the company. So we had a standalone building that everybody came to and, worked at, which was great because it felt like our HQ. What's funny is I called it the Chronoplex, which was like next to the Googleplex. We literally were in Mountain View also.
Good to have a name.
So that was one. Yeah, I didn't buy land yet. I'll give you one tidbit. I'm pretty sure Y Combinator owns some of the land that they have as a company. So this is just a tidbit of why is Y Combinator so great. You may not know that. They own land.
Yeah.
The company owns land, and it sets that stage. But anyway.
I didn't know that. But it's funny when you call it the Chronoplex. There's a lot of influencers online who give to their community a nickname. If you're a fan of whoever, like you're the little Kivatinosis or whatever, you're the community of the influencer, they even name. It gives you a sense of community, it gives you a sense of belonging. So the Chronoplex, it's like you're going to give you a sense as well. Oh, I'm going to work at this great place. So now for Just Paid, you need the Just Paid Plex, or maybe you need a better name, but you need to find a new one.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it, but we'll definitely do something. We'll find a good name.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was such an exciting conversation. I wish we had 2 more hours, but I'll let you go. Thank you so much. It was amazing. I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for inviting me.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like these. And please don't forget to rate us and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time on the Lobster Talks, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, those big ideas start somewhere.